Good morning, and welcome to day 126 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we look at Daniel chapters 5 and 6. In Daniel chapter 5, you have the story of Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall. And to put that in context, remember, all of Daniel occurs while God's people are in exile. So from their perspective, can the God who did not keep them from going in the exile protect them while they're there? If God's not sovereign enough, an opponent might argue, to protect them in Jerusalem, how in the world can he protect them in Babylon? And yet over and over again, while they're in exile, you see these Babylonian kings playing God, and God reminds them who is really king. So you have kings who play God and a God who shows over and over again he is king. You saw this in chapter 1. Chapter 1, what's the temptation that Daniel and his friends face? To eat of the king's table. It harkens back to the Garden of Eden, right? In fact, what's the wonder of the ancient world for which Babylon is famous? The Hanging Gardens. In chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar set up a huge statue of himself to be worshipped as a god and threatened that anyone who didn't worship it would be thrown into a fiery furnace. You have a worship scene and a judgment scene, an artificial heaven and an artificial hell. So in chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar had a vision that because he was playing God, because he refused to give glory to God, that he would be made like a wild beast. That harkens back into creation. And so Nebuchadnezzar is removed from the throne for a time. By the way, you have some Babylonian documents outside of the Bible that back this up, until he gives praise to God. Well, in chapter 5, you have Nebuchadnezzar's successor, Belshazzar, and Belshazzar has a feast. And to make much of himself, what does he do? He brings in the goblets and the vessels that were plundered from the temple, and boasts to his own renown. And so God literally puts the writing on the wall that he will not let this arrogance stand. Daniel is brought in, as he's been brought in several times before, to give the meaning of this vision that is seen. And it's many, many tekel and parson. That's actually even how to render the Hebrew, let alone translate it, is debated among Old Testament scholars. But most go with many, many tekel and parson, which are just four standards or weights for currency. And it usually gets rendered something like you've been measured, weighed, and found wanting. The kingdom is going to be ripped from you. Again, even though God is willing to use Babylon to judge his own people when they keep the covenant, that does not make Babylon above God's judgment itself. And so at the end of chapter 5 of Daniel, Belshazzar that very night is killed, and the kingdom passes to the Persians. So when you get to Daniel 6, you have an empire shift in the exile. They're still in Babylon, but Babylon is now under Persian rule. And the identity of Darius is somewhat debated. But in this passage, again, you have echoes back to the garden and echoes forward to Christ. Daniel is a praying man, and so when he has such favor in the court, the other court officials know that the only way that they can get Daniel in trouble or have a fall from grace is to attack him on religious grounds, and so they make praying to his God illegal, but Daniel continues to serve God faithfully as he has to this point, and it ends up getting him thrown in the lion's den. What some draw as an interesting parallel is how this foreshadows, because we know that Daniel is delivered. This is a very popular story, is that both Daniel and Jesus end up in the tomb of sorts because they were conspired against, and a foreign leader, Pontius Pilate for Jesus, Darius for Daniel, was undermined by those conspiring against Daniel and Jesus, put in this pit, and in doing so, they overcame the lions. In Daniel's case, literal lions. In Jesus' case, the devil, who is a roaring lion, as the New Testament says, and to the judgment of those who tried to conspire against them, and the deliverance to those who would trust in their God. Lots of different things that we could discuss this morning. But hopefully that's some good food for thought. No pun on the lion's den there. Keep reading, keep reflecting, keep responding, and I'll see you tomorrow. God bless.